Hello everyone, welcome to Tejal KHANDELWAL Study Center. I hope you have revised all the topics from Plato until John Stuart Mill through the previous videos. Today's topic is Western political thought GWF Hegel. So let's revise Hegel together. Hegel is a German philosopher and an influential figure in German idealism. His father wanted him to become a clergyman. And so he studied theology, that is the study of religions. He then went on to study philosophy and became a professor of philosophy at many universities in Germany. He also became the official advisor to the Emperor of Prussia. So we can say he was the philosopher of the king. He wanted to do for Germany what Machiavelli did for Italy. He wanted to unify Germany into a single nation state. He followed the philosophical tradition of Germany, and thus we can say that he used obscurantist language, obscure words, and gives specific meanings to various terms. So there is a separate vocabulary known as the Hegelian vocabulary. Thus, Hegel becomes a little difficult to decode. Hegel was also known as the king of philosophers. So now let's move on to see what were the influences on Hegel. He was inspired by the method of dialectics that had been originated by Socrates. He applied the thesis, antithesis and process of synthesis in order to do interpretation of history. And he says, ideas move through dialectics across history. So we can see that there is dialectical idealism in Hegel. He was also inspired by Plato because Plato says there is a universal idea in the eternal reality. And he says that reality is the shadow of ideas that makes Plato an idealist. And yes, the same tradition we can see even in Hegel. Popper has termed Plato as the forerunner of totalitarianism in ancient Greece. He also says that Hegel is the missing link between Plato's totalitarianism and modern forms of totalitarianism. He says individual can have no rights against the state. Individual realizes the best version of himself or herself only in the state. So yes, we can see that Plato's concept of emphasis on the state and more emphasis on the duty aspect, more emphasis on the obedience aspect rather than the rights aspect is there even in Hegel. Then we can see that Aristotle's teleology is also there in Hegel. Teleology means that nature of a thing is in its end, which means everything has a predetermined purpose or a predetermined end towards which it moves. For example, the purpose of a watch is to tell time. The purpose of the apple seed is to become the apple fruit. So, the true form of the apple seed is realized only when it becomes an apple fruit. Similarly, the true form of an individual will be realized only towards the state, only when man becomes part of the state. So he uses teleology in his historical method along with the dialectics of ideas. We can see that he also is inspired by Kant. Kant says state is essential for the moral life of individuals. And yes, this spirit, this reason, this absolute idea and God-derived divine basis that Hegel gives is realized within the state. Rousseau's general will is derived from reason or spirit, which is more important. The spirit is more important, the real will is more important than the actual will. And this inspires Hegel as well. He is also inspired by the French Revolution because according to him, French Revolution is harbinger of change. It will change to a new societal order, a new moral order, a new social order from the previous feudal order. So he is also inspired by the French Revolution. Now, let's see the methodology of Hegel. Hegel uses the historical method. So he says, actually the historical method is the basis of his philosophy. And unlike Locke's empirical method, he uses the historical method to explain the past, the present, as well as the future. So history is like a tool that has been used by Hegel to give predetermined conclusions. So we also say in that way that his entire philosophy is historicism, which means history has become the means to explain his predetermined conclusions. Now, dialectical method was also an aspect of Hegel's method. Where does he apply the concept of dialectics? He applies the concept of dialectics, that is thesis, antithesis and synthesis. Where? In the sphere of history. And what is moving in history? What is moving in history? It is contradiction. The force of contradiction, according to Hegel, is very, very important. For example, if we want to understand pleasure, we need to understand pain. If we want to understand good, we need to understand bad. If we want to understand hotness, then we understand only through coldness. So opposite force is very, very important in order to understand the true nature of a thing. And he says that whenever dialectics happen, that does not mean the final product, which means the synthesis, is a completely new characteristics. In fact, the synthesis will always retain the future of the thesis and antithesis. So it will be like an amalgamation which will have characteristics of these two stages as well. So he applies the dialectical method to history. And he says history moves, ideas move through history. And that's why we can predict what will be the future through where these ideas are leading to. We can discover, he says, the true nature of thing only through contradiction. So various examples that I give. So he emphasizes a lot on contradiction in order to understand things. Now, one more example that we can give in order to explain how contradiction helps us to understand the true nature of a thing. So he says, family is the thesis, civil society is the antithesis, and state is the synthesis. Similarly, despotic government is the thesis, democracy is the antithesis, and constitutional monarchy is the synthesis. Similarly, there is inorganic world and there is organic world, which is inorganic world is the thesis, organic world is the antithesis, and human being is the synthesis, which means human form has inorganic as well as organic features of which it is composed. So for him, dialectics or the force of contradiction is very important to understand history and to understand the movement of ideas across history. Now, so he has applied dialectics in the domain of ideas. That's why we say that he is talking about dialectical idealism as an important part of his methodology. Now let's understand what he talks about, the philosophy of history. So if we have to understand, there are two important schools. One is idealism as a school, which considers an idea as more important, a universal idea which exists in the eternal reality that we can see in the works of Plato. And the other school is materialism, where matter becomes very important, which is matter is the essence of reality. Plato belongs to the earlier school of thought. According to him, he says that there is something known as an absolute idea, which he equates with reason or self-consciousness or spirit, which means he uses these terms synonymously at different places and in various sources and in various writings. So there, when you want to understand Hegel, you need to understand that these terms have some synonymity when he is trying to give a philosophy to history. So he says that ideas are not something that are static in nature. Ideas are dynamic in nature. He says, in search for self-realization, ideas move forward, which means every idea is moving towards its best form. So the world history that we see today, it is a predetermined or a rational plan, which means whatever conclusions that Hegel will draw will be the absolute conclusion, which will be the reality that the future will move towards. So the goal of the absolute idea is perfect knowledge of itself. And in this, history is the process, which means in the history what is moving? Ideas are moving. So he is not explaining history merely through factual events or evidences, but he says across history also there is a philosophy, there is a basis on how things are moving. And what is the basis? It is this absolute idea, it is this reason, it is the spirit that has been derived from God, which means he is trying to give the divine basis to his ideas. Why? Because he says it is from God that that idea has come. So it acquires divine basis. Fine. So he says history is the process by which the absolute idea passes from knowing nothing to full knowledge of itself. So he is trying to give what? A shape to history and not only explain historical events or the movement of various events through some factual evidence. He is actually laying down a shape, a philosophy, right, of how history is moving across the world. Now, if we look at the evolution of history of this absolute idea, so he says, from the inorganic world, it moves towards the organic world. Then it takes the form of human beings. Then the human beings become part of family. Then civil society and then state. And state is what? State is march of God on earth. Because this absolute idea is derived from where? For him. This absolute idea has divine basis. It is coming from God. It is the spirit. So we see a mix of spiritual dimension also when Hegel is talking about this absolute idea. Now, so there are various stages which need to be explained, some characteristic and how the idea will culminate in the state. So first is the family, and he says there is particular altruism. What is this particular altruism? Which means the members of family or the relatives are ready to sacrifice themselves for each other. So we always see that the key element of a family is the spirit of unity, which means everybody does something for others, have a wish to do for the others. And there is no selfish motive here. The whole element is goodness towards each other. And that's why the key characteristic of family is unity. On the other hand, when we come towards the society, the civil society, which is the antithesis in his context, he says there is universal egoism, which means here we will also see that people have selfish motives, because in the civil society they are also coming to meet their economic motives. They come together to meet their material ends. So we see there is a particularity element when we come to the civil society. But what happens to these two stages? What happens after that? Actually, this absolute idea, which is derived from God, so he also terms it as spirit, or he also terms it as an absolute idea which has come from God. So this absolute idea, actually through the process of history, is slowly moving to realize its best self and knowing its full version in the teleological sense in the state. Why state? Because in state, all the contradictory features that are there will get synthesized. That is, in the state, we see universal altruism, obedience of everybody towards the state. So, we see that state is having the feature of universality according to Hegel. So, he says, state is the ethical sphere of universality, freedom and integration. State is founded on freedom instead of coercion, and so it is final realization of spirit in history. So when he says state is founded on freedom, so we need to understand that what is his meaning of freedom here. So he says freedom. You might misinterpret this freedom. I'm just revising this line. He says, state is an ethical sphere of universality, freedom and integration. State is founded on freedom. State is founded on freedom. What is the meaning of freedom for him? According to him, freedom does not mean individuality or liberty like the liberal thought says. For Hegel, freedom means rationality, which means this absolute idea, right, is a rational idea. It is based on freedom, which means it is based on a rational plan towards which it is moving. Okay. And this is how the state, according to him, reconciles freedom with values of community. In the realization of community, he says, each individual will find his or her own fulfillment while simultaneously contributing to the well-being of the whole. That's why this absolute idea or spirit which has divine basis, all of this ethical aspect of individual will be realized within the state according to Hegel. So you understand how he combines to give a philosophy to history. First, he uses the historical method. He makes history as a tool to explain all events in the world. Then he uses ideas within the sphere of history. How are the movement of the ideas? The movement of ideas is through dialectics. That's why we say dialectical idealism. And then he says that this dialectical idealism that is happening, it has a final purpose or end. So he also uses teleology. So very well logically combined system builder Hegel is. He will use all the influences and, link each of them with the whole. This is how he explains the philosophy of history. Now, let's understand the key statement of Hegel, which is a key aspect of his theory of state. We have already seen through the evolution of history that he's explaining, which means the evolution of absolute idea in the history that he is explaining, the culmination is in the state. So he says state is march of God on earth, which means the absolute reason or idea, it is God sent, it is through the spirit, and he uses these terms synonymously. Now, let's understand what is the meaning of the statement. rational is real and real is rational. So, in the most general sense, when you decode this statement at its first glance, which means just like a generalist, and you don't know that this statement has been given by Hegel, how will you understand this statement? You will say that whatever is happening according to reason, which means according to rationality, is real, and whatever is real has happened through some reason, which means whatever is existing in this world, the reality of this world, there is some reason that is there behind this world that we are seeing. So as a common individual, you will understand this statement, which means whatever is existing according to reason is the reality, and the reality can be explained through reason. However, this is not the meaning that Hegel is giving to this statement. So let's see what Hegel means when he says rational is real and real is rational. He is a great system builder in the history of political philosophy. So first he will say that whatever be reason, which means rational, it gets its complete self-realization in the state. Okay? So, which means when we say the absolute idea or the reason or the spirit or the spirit derived from God, all of this gets its complete self-realization where? In the state. So, what is state? State has been equated with rationality. State has been considered as the unfolding of reason. Is this understood? So this rational is real, matlab ye jo state hai, state is actually the unfolding of reason or rationality. Now, so the true nature of reality is known when fully developed in the state. So state is real. Now here, you don't understand the meaning of the term real as something that is existing. It is not empirical reality. तो जब वो कहता है rational is real, यहाँ पे real का मतलब existence नहीं है या empirical things around you नहीं है. Real का मतलब है something that is very important, something that is very, very fundamental. Okay? So he means the true nature of reality is known when it is fully developed, and where it will be developing, which means this reason that is derived, the spirit that is derived, the absolute idea that is derived, when it will attain the best form through the process of dialectics, when it comes in the state. That's why state is real. Okay? Thus, state is embodiment of rationality, which means reason, absolute idea, spirit, or something that has come from God, and it is embodiment of something very fundamental, something very important. Okay, so don't understand a real means reality or empirical or existential things. For him, real in this sense implies something that is fundamental, something that is very, very important. Okay, so he says that state is of eternal reality and necessary essence of the spirit. Therefore, state is rational. He also says the true nature of reason or the rationality is known when it gets complete fulfillment in its entirety, which means in the state as a whole. So, state is equal to rational. State is equal to also real. So, what is rational is real, and what is real is rational, which means the A is to B, B is to C. So A is to C. That logic will apply when he is trying to derive, okay, the basis or formulate his theory of state. So for Hegel, all states are rational, which means they are consummation of historical process of unfolding of reason. And therefore, all states deserve respect and they are worthy of reverence. So I hope you have understood. Rationality means reason here, okay, and reason मतलब वही absolute idea को भी equate करते हैं वो reason से या spirit से, like. So yes, it is gets complete self-realization in the state, so it is rational. On true nature of reality, which means something that is fundamental, okay, is known when it is fully developed. मतलब आइडिया जब पूरे अपने पीक पे पहुंच जाती है डायलेक्टिक्स के माध्यम से, तब वो बेस्ट फॉर्म रियलाइज करती है. दैट इज वाई, व्हाट इज दैट? दैट इज स्टेट. स्टेट इज मोस्ट फंडामेंटल, स्टेट इज मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट. सो देयर कैन बी नो इंडिविजुअल अगेंस्ट द स्टेट, देयर कैन बी नो राइट्स अगेंस्ट द स्टेट, एंड ही लेज द बेसिस for absolute obedience towards the state. That's why Popper says he is the missing link between Plato and modern form of totalitarianism. So I hope this statement is very clear to all of you. And the other statement also, which is well known, is what? State is march of God on earth. And how he gives the basis of philosophy to explanation of history in the world. Thank you so much. I hope you understood Hegel today and we have decoded it in the most simplest manner for you. Thank you.